Hello and welcome back for another Giant Slayer TFT Top 10 video. Today's video will be a countdown of the top champions for ranked play in patch 1021. Due to the recent hotfix patch, our top 10 this week will be using meta trends from just a few days of play as the meta needs time to settle. We'll be talking about why these champions are doing well and which compositions you're likely to see them played in. With all that said, let's dive on in. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come, so be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video. Kicking off our top 10 list, we have Yasuo coming in at number 10. Overall in set 4, there's far less interest put towards one-cost champions than the other tiers. There's certainly a few that stand out, and Yasuo is one of them, as he's the bread and butter of Duelist both in the early game and later on. Duelist has really solidified itself so far in the meta, and Yasuo is a key aspect to doing well with that composition. Why is that? It mostly comes down to the impact that Yasuo has during Stage 2 and in the earlier parts of Stage 3 when you're able to find a Duelist chosen Yasuo. This chosen is one of the strongest that you can find early on, especially for one-cost units. Yasuo will often be enough to win streak you to Krugs, which is a huge boon when playing Duelist, as it keeps you high enough health with a good economy to essentially skip Stage 3. Another factor is that Yasuo 3 is a crazy power spike if you can hit it quickly. If you manage to 3-star him before the beginning of Stage 4, you're putting yourself in such an advantageous position, you're almost guaranteed a top 4 spot from that point on. Few other one-cost units have this amount of potential, and while Yasuo certainly does fall off later on in the game, the amount of control he provides prior to that makes him a valuable asset to any Duelist player. Time to move on to the next champion on today's list, coming in at number 9, Irelia. Let's first preface this by saying that, yes, both Divine and Adept were nerfed in the hotfix. This means that the value of Irelia does go down, but we did still want to highlight her as the impact she's had on this patch is insanely high. We'll talk more about her future in the meta, but quickly let's go over what made her such a valuable pickup before the hotfix. Irelia really was the glue that made Divine as a composition function. By that we mean her traits, Enlightened, Adept, Divine, made her the perfect linchpin of the comp. Sure, the build could work without her, but the amount of value that she provided was immense and made her easily one of the top champions of this patch. But then the hotfix came, and now Divine isn't really a build anymore, at least for now. So where does this leave Irelia? She certainly still does have a place being an Adept, as there are builds that still use the trait. Enlightened is also commonly played, and Irelia is a necessary component for that trait. But honestly, she's such a flexible champion due to having 3 synergies that she almost will always get value, similar to how Cassidy was in set 3. While the meta is still developing, it's certain Irelia will remain usable moving forward, even if Divine doesn't make a comeback in the meta. Next, we have Zilean as the number 8 champion on today's list. Zilean, as usual, is the representative for Mystic on our top 10 list. The value of this trait cannot be understated, so we have to give a nod to at least one of the many useful Mystics that are available. We give that spot to Zilean as his ultimate is always really good and practically game-changing in the late game. The only issue for Zilean is that Cultist is not doing as well anymore after the changes it received. So he's basically just being played for Mystic, which isn't inherently a bad thing, but does mean that you may find yourself leaning on other Mystics instead. Yuumi is a healer that pairs with Ahri, for example. Despite the lack of a useful secondary trait, it's still clear that as far as the late game Mystics go, and champions in general, Zilean is one of the most valuable that you can play. Keeping with the 5-cost theme, our next 2 champions are also legendary. Up first is Lee Sin as the number 7 champion. Lee Sin is another champion that skyrocketed in value during the Divine meta. But unlike a lot of other Divine champions, he's still doing well in the meta because of his secondary tag, Duelist. In addition to that, he's overall just a powerful late game champion due to his ultimate. We've also seen champions like Set and Kayn fall off in priority for the late game legendary champions, so Lee Sin kind of was a replacement for them. Sure, he won't do as much damage as Kayn did, and he doesn't have the AoE like Set, but he does eliminate champions efficiently. Even more importantly, he removes champions from the board that may be impossible for your comp to deal with otherwise due to the nature of his ultimate. All in all, Lee Sin as a champion is probably not healthy for the game, as his ability is another form of instant kill mechanic that players have always disliked. But the mechanic is precisely why he's so valuable to play, even after Divine was nerfed. And our last 5 cost champion on today's list is Azir, coming in at number 6. Azir is in a really interesting position as all of his synergies kinda don't matter at all. Warlord occasionally gets played, and you can see Keeper used as a frontline for sharpshooters once in a blue moon, but neither of those traits are common in the meta once you hit the late game. Even Emperor is not as great, as it just gives you 2 rocks to place on the board that soak up a bit of damage. Thus, the question is raised, why even play Azir if you're not using him for his synergies? The answer is simple. His ultimate is really good. The damage of Azir's ultimate is decent, especially if you give him any items, but more importantly, the amount of crowd control it outputs is what gives it value. There's a knockback effect to any enemies nearby when he casts it, and others further away get knocked up for a few seconds. And enemies hit have their movement speed slowed drastically. And that's where Azir gains value as a protector to your backline. He can shove away assassins, slow down melee champions from moving forward, and stun enemy backlines. So if you're looking for extra defensive options late in the game, we recommend you try out Azir. Time to talk about a few of the current meta carries, starting with Akali as the number 5 champion. Akali is really packing a punch in the meta now that Divine is no longer an issue, even though Akali 3 also received a minor nerf in the hotfix. The damage output really comes from the large buff that ninjas received in 1021, as Akali 3 can practically one-shot any champion in a ninja assassin comp. There's also a hidden value to champions like Akali, as she, along with a few others, can only be chosen for one of their traits. Akali can only be a chosen assassin, so whenever you roll her as a chosen, you're guaranteed value as she's giving herself both the ninja trait and the assassin trait. That makes Akali an amazing champion to slot in during the mid game, even if you have no plans to play a composition around her later. Simply play her for the power spike she provides and sell her later on if you want. Not only is Akali a great late game carry in the current meta, she's also a valuable 3 cost carry for your mid game. Another ninja to keep an eye out for is the number 4 champion on today's list, Zed. Shade has certainly taken a hit recently as Kayn has, well, fallen nearly out of the meta as his late game prowess has diminished greatly. And Spirit as a synergy is really not cutting it anymore, so where does that leave Zed and Shade? Perfectly fine, actually. Okay, jokes aside, Zed is still a beast for 2 reasons. Ninja, and the fact that Shade still scales really well with attack speed. That means you don't need Spirit for Zed to do well, you just need items like RFC and Rageblade. Sure, Shade as a synergy isn't going to be your main focus, but all you need is another Shade or a chosen Zed to get value out of the stealth that the trait provides. The stealth effect is really why Zed can carry so well, alongside the fact that Ninja adds a ton of extra damage. Combine the two together and you have a scary mid-game carry with Zed, who transitions really well into late game if you can 3-star him. Up next, we have Ahri coming in at number 3 on today's list. Honestly, Ahri may not deserve to be 3rd on the list, but she's really taken the meta by force again after Divine has been hotfixed. No longer does she have to worry about pesky Divine units taking less damage from her AoE, she can safely blow up the squishy backline champions of sharpshooters or annihilate assassins diving onto her. Let's get to the point of what makes Ahri good, which we just alluded to, her AoE damage. It's just so good, especially when you give her Infinity Edge and Jeweled Gauntlet to get a guaranteed giant critical hit. Ahri also benefits from the items that were recently buffed, like Chalice and Zeke's, since they will passively buff her. One last thing to talk about in regards to Ahri is that she makes the perfect companion to a Vanguard Mystic composition. Those champions with those 2 traits slow down the fight long enough for Ahri to get multiple casts off. It's almost similar to Cassiopeia in set 3, except it's a large burst of AoE damage instead of a damage over time. And with true damage no longer being that much of an issue, it's hard for the majority of compositions to deal with the combination of armor and magic resist of Vanguard Mystic. This means that Ahri is well protected and allowed to freely do what she wants in team fights. Okay, so we have a dilemma for our next spot on the list, so we've decided to give the number 2 spot to both Jinx and Gin. It's honestly a bit too hard to separate these 2 champions as they are hugely important for sharpshooters. Yeah, you may be able to run one without the other, but if you want to efficiently do well with sharpshooters, you absolutely need both Jinx and Gin. Jinx is the CC and the magic damage dealer for sharpshooters that really lets Jin, the main damage carry, pop off in fights. While Jinx stuns half of the enemy team, you have Jin wrecking the front line with high physical damage. The 2 together work practically better than any other pair of champions in the game. Sharpshooters are also one of the current top builds in the meta, which gives even more value to Jinx and Jin, making them quite contested. In previous metas, it wasn't too hard to find a Jinx 3, but nowadays, it's super difficult. We will say, though, that after the nerfs that they did to Jin 3, he's no longer that great, so if you're looking to 3-star one of these two champions, we recommend Jinx. And now for our number 1 champion for today, we have Sejuani. Sejuani really deserves this top spot for the second half of 1021, as she's always been a staple of the meta and is hard carrying quite a few comps right now with her ult. Whether that's sharpshooters, Vanguard Mystic, or just in general, she's almost always going to get a lot of value. In addition to her ultimate, she's also a Vanguard. Vanguard is doing quite well now that Divine is no longer a thing, as there's quite a bit of physical damage in the meta, at least compared to previous patches. So slap some defensive items on your Sejuani and watch her hard carry team fights by AoE stunning the entire enemy board. That is going to be it for our top 10 champions, but before we go, we have just one honorable mention to hand out this week. That honorable mention goes to Warweek. Okay, yes, Warweek really isn't a thing after the hotfix, but come on. We have to acknowledge his impact on the game for that first week of 1021. Sure, part of it had to do with Static Shiv, but his overall kit really made the perfect storm when combined with Shiv. Thus, we have to take our hats off to Warweek and hope he enjoyed his time in the sun during Warweek. Alright folks, that's all we have for you for today. The meta is still being figured out after the hotfix patch, so we expect to see a lot of shifts in what champions are the most valuable in the next few days. That said, the overall meta feels quite diverse, which points towards a healthy balance. Let us know in the comment section below what champions you think deserve to be on the list and what ones we may have missed. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.